Shalom, Rabbi Michael Panitz,
Cantor David Proser,
and we very much hope that you who are watching this video are healthy and are holding up as well as possible. We also hope that this series of videos will not have to be prolonged for too many weeks, but we are prepared to bring words of Torah to you in your home as long as may be necessary.
we would much rather be doing this in front of you in our sanctuaries, I'm sure just as much as you would rather be in our sanctuaries rather than watching, but here we are, we're here for you.
The format of this video is that Cantor Proser will introduce the scriptural lesson that is read on any given Shabbat, and I will follow with a sermon on the same theme.
Thank you, Rabbi. This Shabbat, March 21st, the 25th of Adar, the last Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So it has a special designation, it's Shabbat HaChodesh, on which we read a special mafter portion to remind us that Rosh Chodesh is coming. It reminds us, as do many Torah readings or mafter readings as we approach special events, because in the old days, remember, there were no funeral homes. And if there were no funeral homes, there were no calendars. So you couldn't just have it up on your wall and say, Pesach is coming. So various reminders about things we need to do, especially approaching Pesach, were done with special mafter readings. So this Shabbat, we would have taken out 2 Sifrei Torah. The main reading that follows our schedule of year-long readings would be a combined parsha of Vayakhel and Pekutei, the last 2 parshiot of the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. In this parsha, Moshe convokes the Israelite nation and reminds the people of the proper way to observe the Shabbat, detailing the prohibition against kindling or using fire on Shabbat. Moshe calls upon the people to provide materials for completion of the tabernacle. Now, this may seem a strange place to have jumped around Shabbat tabernacle, but we're in a series of readings where instructions for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle, are given. And so Midrash and rabbinical interpretation teaches us that because a command for Shabbat was inserted in the middle of these instructions, it was to remind us that we shouldn't be so enthusiastic to complete the Mishkan that we're going to violate the Shabbat to do it. And so the importance of Shabbat is reiterated to the people. The Israelites respond enthusiastically, exceeding the need and producing a surplus of materials. The Parsha repeatedly mentions that women participate in this process, referring to a group of women who performed tasks at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The creatively gifted Bezalel, who was further blessed with the ability to teach others effectively, is designated as the leading master craftsman in the effort to complete the beautification and the maintenance of the sanctuary. Oholiab also takes a leading role in providing for the Mishkan's artistic and aesthetic needs. Parshat Vayakhel revisits information familiar from earlier chapters in the book of Exodus, describing the construction of the tabernacle and its various furnishings and accoutrements. The final details reported in the Parsha are construction of the priestly wash basin from copper mirrors donated by Israelite women, and a report on the dimensions of the enclosure of the holy precincts. The closing portion of the book of Exodus, Parshat Pekutei, opens with an inventory of the metals that had been contributed to the sanctuary, together with a more precise count of the Israelite population that brought those gifts. 603,550 men over the age of 20 when they became eligible for military service, with the implicit addition of their families. A detailed description of the elaborate priestly vestments is provided. The Mishkan is finally completed. Moshe bestows a blessing on the Israelites for their diligent efforts. The completed tabernacle, now ready for deployment, is erected and its furnishings properly arranged at God's command on the first day of the first month, affecting a fitting New Year's celebration. It had been precisely 9 months since the revelation at Mount Sinai. The ritual implements within the sanctuary are anointed and dedicated to their sacred functions. In a final consummation of the construction effort, the divine presence fills the tabernacle. When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out, continuing their trek to the promised land. During these journeys, the cloud of God's presence would rest over the tabernacle by day and take on a fiery aspect at night. All that would have been read in 7 aliyot from the first Sefer Torah. At this point, after blessings and after the Kaddish, the second Sefer Torah would be opened, and the Parsha, known as the Maftir, would be read. This Maftir this week, on Shabbat HaChodesh, is from the book of Exodus, chapter 12, 1 to 20. It revisits something we read a few weeks ago from Parshat Bo. It provides instruction for establishing the Israelite calendar, with the first month in the spring, today being the month of Nisan, but in biblical parlance the month of Aviv, when Passover is observed. Detailed instructions for observance of the Paschal offering and the festival of Matzot are transmitted. The centrality of these rites is reflected in the chapter's 7-fold repetition of the Hebrew verb root shin mem resh, like in shamar, to guard or to keep. Much of our own Passover observance, matzah and the prohibition of leaven, maror, the family meal, the commemoration of the Exodus, the timing and structure of the festival, finds its origin in these verses. And again, in keeping with the theme of using the Maftir as a reminder, it reminds people that Rosh Chodesh Nisan is only a few days away, and that means the coming of Pesach is 2 weeks away, and to continue or begin their preparations for the Chag.
In our tradition, it's customary for a sermon actually to be a Divar Torah, a word of teaching about the Torah portion that is going to be read or that has just been read on this Shabbat. In other words, we have a lectionary and we preach on a text from that lectionary. Now, you might think that that's artificial. If I want to talk about topic X, why do I have to find a verse in chapter Y that deals with topic X? You'd think that it would lead to a very forced style of preaching. I can tell you from 42 years of experience that I am routinely amazed at how the particular chapter that we are supposed to read in synagogue on a given week is over and over and over again uniquely well suited to the theme that I want to discuss. And this is quite true with today's Torah reading. Cantor Proser has described what the Torah reading is about. And he mentioned that it's the final 2 large units of the book of Exodus. In fact, it's chapters 35 through 40 of Exodus. So listen to the very first verse of chapter 35, the first word, literally, of the Torah reading. Vayakhel, Moses assembled, Moses convoked. Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Moses assembled the entire congregation of the children of Israel. That, my friends, is precisely the issue. We can't assemble. We're reading about something which is aspirational, but we can't do it today. Moses assembled the Israelites really, physically, actually. We are assembling virtually, electronically. I don't scorn it. I'm very grateful that we can do that. But we shouldn't ignore what is missing. The actual physical contact and presence with our neighbors, with the people in our circle of shalom. That's what Moses did. Now, there are all sorts of interesting nuances about what Moses did. I'm going to read for you one of the classic commentaries to this verse, a commentary written by a rabbi in 13th century Spain, a Sephardic rabbi. His name was Moshe ben Nachman, Moses, son of Nachman. This is his comment to the verse I just read. Moses then convoked the whole Israelite community. Here are the words of the commentator. This included both men and women, for they all contributed to the construction of the tabernacle. After having told Aaron, the chieftains, and all the male Israelites what God had commanded him on Mount Sinai, and that was the previous chapter, chapter 34, verses 31 and 32, Moses put the veil over his face. We're going to have to think about that. Moses put the veil over his face and then convened the whole community, men, women, and children. This may have occurred on the day after he came down from the mountain. He then told them everything that he had been commanded about the tabernacle before the breaking of the tablets. For at this point, the Holy One was once again reconciled with the Israelites and had given him a second set of tablets and made a new covenant with him. So Moses now gives them all the instructions about the tabernacle that he was originally given. Very interesting commentary. Let's focus on the fact that Moses is wearing a veil. Now, some of you may be fond of the Lego construction toy. Lego units are called bricks, and there's actually a book called the Brick Testament. It has a New Testament as well as an Old Testament. We're not interested in one as much as in the other, but here's a picture of Moses teaching from the Brick Testament, and notice he has a veil over his face. Why does he have a veil over his face? Because when Moses was on the mountain, so close to the radiance of God, we are told that his face was transfigured. It began to shine. The famous sculptor Michelangelo relied on a mistranslation and gave Moses horns. The famous statue of Moses in the church in Rome of San Pietro in Vincoli, St. Peter in Chains, has a seated Moses, very powerful figure. I saw it once, amazing sculpture. But there are horns on his head because the Hebrew word for a ray of light is a keren, like the Latin word cornus, meaning a horn. It's the same word. So the Hebrew word keren also means a ray of light, and it also means a horn, because a ray of light has a bit of a horn-like shape. So Moses did not have horns. I can tell you once when I was in a kind of a backwoods church in Georgia, as a teenager on a interfaith dialogue, one of the teenage boys from that church very shyly asked me if I would lift up he didn't know it's called a kippah, he called it a lid. If I would lift up my lid, and I could tell that he wanted to see if my kippah were hiding some horns. He really believed that. This was 1971, it wasn't the Middle Ages. So I showed him, and he was very relieved to see that that bit of folklore is actually not true. So Moses had a radiant face, the Bible says, so much so that it distracted the Israelites. Or maybe it frightened them. We know that we are very, very attuned to whether someone's face fits within the norms of what we expect to see in the community. And if someone's appearance is not according to the norm, there's usually some sort of strong reaction. Moses came to recognize that the sight of him was distracting or maybe frightening the Israelites, so he put on a veil so that they could be in his presence. But the Bible also says that he would take the veil off when he was conveying the words of God to them. Maybe he was willing for them to be overawed by the sight of his face when, after all, he was referring to God's words. But anytime he did something else, he put the veil on. So the Rabbi Nachmanides, very precisely says that Moses put the veil on to convoke, to assemble the crowd. Because when he's saying, come gather around, he's not at that moment giving God's words. So then he needs to have the veil on. The veil can come off when he actually teaches. Now, what does this have to do with our life in March of 2020? Well, this veil looks suspiciously like a face mask. Actually, not so different from some of the face masks that I have seen people wearing. Some of us are wearing face masks. I hope it helps them, and maybe even more so, if they are carrying anything, I hope it helps their neighbors. Now, what are the lessons to be drawn from this intriguing story? I draw 3 lessons from it. The first lesson is that community is valuable. If Moses, in truth, came down from the mountain, according to our tradition, it was on a very holy day, it was the first Yom Kippur ever. He came down from the mountain, and the very next day he convenes the people Israel. It means that gathering them has intrinsic value, and gathering ourselves has intrinsic value. The fact that we can't do it now, I hope, will make us want to do it even more. As King Solomon's ring said, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. This period of sheltering at home will pass. We'll have the opportunity to come back to the synagogues of our choices, to the Kempsville Kehilat Beit HaMidrash, to Temple Israel, or to any other synagogue that you might belong to. I dearly hope that when the permission is given, that you will flock to the synagogue of your choice and fill its seats. Community is valuable. But the second lesson, which is taught by the veil of Moses, is that safeguards are sometimes necessary. We recognize without murmuring that it's necessary to do what we can to minimize the rapid spread of the virus. So it occasions some inconvenience, some fear for that matter, but all of that is preferable to people getting sick. And the third lesson is that when we have to give up something that we value, hopefully just temporarily, let us resolve to cherish it all the more when we have it again. I see this pastorally when I go to the hospital. I visit someone who's recovering from a heart attack or recovering from some pulmonary issue. And the patient who's recovering says to me, Rabbi, I should have learned this a long time ago, but I've smoked my last cigarette. Or the patient will say to me, I'm going to come home, I'm going to follow the regimen, I'm going to get on that treadmill, I'm going to be healthy. Why didn't I pay attention to the gift of health when it was easy to preserve, but now I'm going to do my bit? People say that to me. I've heard it over and over again. So if health is one of those great blessings that we appreciate when it's hopefully temporarily gone, what are other ones? Well, one is relationships. We really do cherish our human contact. Some of us need it more often and some of us need more of it than others, but we all need some. Some of us are comfortable with computer-based interacting. Some of us really need to, quote unquote, press the flesh. But everybody has some level of need. So with relationship as well, if it's temporarily denied to us, let's resolve to cherish it more. When we have this again, and you see someone and you're allowed to approach them, let them see that your approach is one occasioned by genuine friendship or by love. In the meantime, let's take advantage of telecommunications. Who should you have called whom you've been putting off? Now's a good time to call them. If health, if relationship are examples of blessings that we appreciate because absence makes the heart grow fonder, that's also true of community. Community has taken a hit for necessary reasons, but let us all be part of the process of making it heal even stronger than it was before. So I'm going to finish with a sentence that has 4 S's in it. See you in synagogue someday soon. And 2 more S's, Shabbat Shalom.